The supreme warlord of the Zyrak Dominion stood on the command deck of his warship Vorak Thul, gazing out through the massive viewport at the vast armada assembled before him. 10,000 warships, each a marvel of destruction, hovered in formation, their weapons primed, their crews prepared to unleash devastation upon an unworthy world. Earth, the insignificant blue sphere below, had no idea what was coming. The warlord clenched his mandibles in satisfaction. This was no mere conquest, it was a demonstration. The Dominion had spent millennia expanding, crushing resistance, absorbing civilizations into its iron rule. None had stood against its might. The Council of Supreme Generals had declared Earth a test of efficiency, a world to be subjugated without effort, its people enslaved or eradicated if they refused submission. A deep voice echoed through the command deck as his second-in-command, General Kroarvek, approached. "Our fleets are in position, Warlord. Orbital bombardment will commence on your command." The Warlord allowed himself a moment to savor the inevitable. "Proceed," he ordered. Across Earth's orbit, Zyrak warships adjusted their positions. Massive cannons hummed to life, energy pulsing through their barrels. Within seconds, beams of raw destruction lanced downward, striking key cities with precision. Washington, Moscow, Beijing, London. Each capital targeted in synchronized annihilation. Explosions rippled across continents, engulfing buildings in towering fireballs. Plumes of smoke stretched toward the sky, a testament to the might of the Zyrak war machine. The initial assault lasted exactly 8 minutes. Then, silence. The warlord studied the displays before him, expecting transmissions of surrender or panic distress calls. None came. Instead, static filled the communication channels. Something was interfering. Korvik frowned, tapping a control panel. "Strange. We should be receiving signals of mass confusion. Our intelligence indicated that humans rely heavily on digital communication, but their networks are silent." The warlord narrowed his eyes. Their infrastructure must have collapsed. Deploy ground forces and secure the capital cities. Wipe out resistance and establish planetary command centers. Within moments, thousands of dropships descended from the fleet, streaking through the atmosphere like fiery comets. Xerox soldiers, clad in advanced exo-armor, stormed the smoldering ruins of human civilization. The warlord observed their progress through the fleet's tactical displays. At first, everything proceeded as expected. Soldiers reported minimal resistance, encountering only scattered survivors in the wreckage. Buildings lay in ruins, streets were deserted. But then the reports changed. "Commander Zorak's battalion has gone silent," a communications officer announced. The warlord's gaze sharpened. "Explain." No response from his dropship or ground units. Last transmission indicated no enemy contact. Korvik exhaled sharply. A malfunction, perhaps? Before the warlord could reply, another report came in. 4 more battalions have ceased communication. No distress signals, no visual contact from orbit. The command deck grew tense. The warlord tapped a clawed finger against the console. "Deploy recon drones. I want eyes on those locations immediately." The drones launched in synchronized bursts, sweeping across the ruined landscapes. Their cameras relayed footage back to the command ship. The images made no sense. The cities, previously devastated by the orbital strike, now showed signs of reshaping, as if the destruction had been deliberately altered. Rubble had been rearranged, forming pathways and barricades. Smoke obscured the streets in thick, unnatural patterns. Shadows moved where no figures were visible. The corpses of fallen soldiers had vanished. "Impossible," Korvik murmured. The warlord's mandibles clicked in irritation. "This is no natural response. Something is interfering with our operations. Have the humans developed stealth technology?" An urgent alert blared through the command deck. A live feed from one of the drones flickered onto the main display. A squad of Xerox soldiers moved cautiously through a destroyed urban center, weapons raised. The camera zoomed in as they approached a collapsed building. From the rubble, something moved. It happened in an instant. One of the soldiers stepped forward and vanished. No scream, no struggle, just gone. The squad froze. The drone's sensors picked up a faint disturbance in the air, like a shimmer of heat. A second soldier turned, weapon ready, only for a shadow to surge forward, wrapping around his form and dragging him into the debris. The remaining soldiers fired wildly, but their shots struck nothing. Then the feed cut out. The warlord's claws dug into the console. "What is this?" Korvac swallowed hard. "Warlord. Something is hunting us." "Another alert," a fleet officer spoke quickly, his voice edged with panic. "Multiple ground units are missing. Entire dropships have disappeared from our tracking systems. Reports indicate movement underground. Unknown hostile forces are engaging our troops with unconventional tactics." The warlord felt a slow, creeping unease, a feeling he had not experienced in centuries of war. Unconventional? What weapons are they using? The officer hesitated before answering. "We don't know. There are no weapon discharges, no signs of advanced technology. The enemy appears and vanishes. Xerac forces disappear before they can report visual contact. It's like the humans aren't fighting a battle. They're erasing us." A heavy silence fell over the command deck. The Xyrak were the apex predators of the galaxy. No species had ever resisted them like this. Their superior technology, their fleet's overwhelming firepower, none of it mattered when the enemy could not be seen, could not be understood. Then a new transmission came through, a single soldier, battered and bloodied, his exo-armor scorched, his breathing ragged. His eyes were wide with something unfamiliar, fear. "Warlord," he gasped, "we never should have come here." The warlord leaned in. "Explain yourself." The soldier struggled to steady his breathing. "The humans, they knew we were coming. They didn't run. They didn't panic. They prepared." A burst of static, then the final words before the transmission cut out. "You think you've invaded Earth, but Earth has invaded you." The warlord straightened, his mind racing. The invasion had barely begun, yet something was terribly wrong. He turned to Korvac, his voice low and measured. "Send a message to all ground units," he ordered. "Reinforce positions, switch to defensive protocols. We will understand this enemy before we proceed further." Korvac hesitated. "And if we can't?" The warlord clenched his fists. "Then we make sure no one leaves this planet alive, human or Xerac." As the command deck buzzed with activity, the warlord gazed down at Earth. He had once believed it would fall in a day. Now he was beginning to understand. This was no ordinary conquest. This was a trap. The warlord stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the tactical displays, watching as reports of missing troops multiplied. The situation had deteriorated faster than he had thought possible. A war of attrition was unfolding, but not in the way he had expected. His forces were not being defeated in battle, they were vanishing. Korvac's voice was tense as he approached. "Warlord, reinforcements have landed in all major cities, but we are still losing soldiers. Whole squads are disappearing without a trace. The enemy has not been seen, and there are no signs of direct engagement." The warlord's mandibles clicked in irritation. "Have any survivors provided useful intelligence?" Korvac hesitated. "We managed to extract one soldier from the ruins of New Moscow. He is the only known survivor from his battalion. Bring him to me." Moments later, the doors to the command deck opened, and a battered Xerox soldier stumbled forward, escorted by 2 guards. His armor was scratched, his breathing heavy, his eyes wide with something the warlord had seen in countless species before. The warlord studied him with a piercing gaze. "Identify yourself." The soldier straightened, though his limbs trembled. "Sergeant Korak, 3rd Infantry Division. Report what you saw." Korak swallowed hard. "We landed in New Moscow with 3,000 troops. The city was silent, too silent. No civilians, no enemy forces, nothing. We spread out, securing key locations, but within minutes, soldiers began to disappear, one by one. No alarms, no warning. We only realized something was wrong when we tried to contact command and got nothing but static. The warlord's claws tapped against the metal console. You mean to tell me that an entire battalion was wiped out without firing a single shot? Korak's breath hitched. Not wiped out. Taken. I don't know how, but something was waiting for us. It was in the shadows, in the ruins. I heard screams, short, sharp, cut off, like someone had their throats slit in an instant. I saw movement, but when I turned, there was nothing there. The warlord narrowed his eyes. Did you see the enemy? Korak hesitated, his mandibles twitching. No, but I felt them. His voice dropped to a whisper. They were there, watching us, studying us. We never saw them, but they saw us. And then they started hunting. Korvek stepped forward, his face rigid with disbelief. Are you suggesting the humans have developed some kind of cloaking technology? Korak clenched his fists. I don't know what it is, but our weapons were useless. We fired into the dark, into the smoke, but nothing hit. They were everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And then... He exhaled shakily. Then came the whispering. The warlord's expression darkened. Whispering? Korak nodded, his voice dropping lower. At first it was just static in our helmets, but then we started hearing voices, our own names, spoken in our own language. It came from the comms, but also outside, in the air. We heard it echo through the ruins, like the city itself was whispering to us. Korvek let out a sharp exhale. Psychological warfare. Korak's eyes locked onto his. It worked. The warlord studied the soldier carefully. Korak was not weak. He was a seasoned warrior, a survivor of planetary campaigns against enemies far more advanced than humans. Yet now he was trembling. The warlord's decision was swift. You are relieved of duty. Report to medical. Korak stiffened. Warlord, with respect, do not send more troops down there. It's not war down there, it's something else. We thought we were the hunters. We were wrong. The warlord ignored the plea and turned to Korvek. Increase patrols in all occupied cities. Deploy thermal scanners, motion detectors, whatever it takes. I want this enemy found. Korak let out a bitter laugh. You think technology will help? You still don't understand. The warlord's gaze snapped to him. Explain. Korak's mandibles twitched. The technology was the first thing to fail. The silence that followed was heavy. Korak continued, his voice now a whisper. Our scanners showed nothing. Motion detectors gave false readings. Heat signatures disappeared the moment we locked onto them. The humans aren't using technology to hide. The planet itself is hiding them. Korvek shook his head. That's impossible. Korak's expression turned grim. Then tell me why our own ships lost track of us, why our own sensors started failing the moment we landed. We've fought primitive species before, but we've never encountered anything like this. We expected resistance. We expected to crush it. But we never expected... He trailed off. Expected what? The warlord pressed. Korak hesitated. That humans might not be fighting alone. The room fell into an eerie stillness. The warlord's mandibles twitched. Are you suggesting there's another faction at play? Korak exhaled. I don't know. But what I do know is that something is interfering with our fleet, something far more dangerous than simple resistance. Maybe it's the humans. Maybe it's the planet itself. But we don't control this war anymore. We're walking into the dark with no way out. The warlord stared at him, considering his words. He would not allow fear to dictate his strategy. He turned sharply to Korvek. Increase surveillance. If the enemy refuses to show itself, we will flush it out. Korak let out another bitter chuckle. You still think you're in control. The warlord shot him a sharp glare. Enough. Take him away. The guards escorted Korak from the room. But his final words echoed in the warlord's mind. You think you've invaded Earth. But Earth has invaded you. As the doors closed, Korvek turned to the warlord. "What are your orders?" The warlord's mandibles clenched. "Deploy aerial drones over every occupied zone. If humans are using non-conventional tactics, we will respond with overwhelming force. Reduce their strongholds to rubble. Burn them out if necessary." Korvek nodded. "And if we still don't find them?" The warlord exhaled slowly. "Then we will make them show themselves." As the command deck buzzed with orders and preparations, the warlord gazed at the planet below. He had expected to be the predator in this war. Now, for the first time in his long and brutal career, he was beginning to wonder. Had the Dominion miscalculated? Had they made a mistake coming here? Deep within the ruins of Earth's cities, something stirred. Something that had waited patiently for the invaders to feel safe, to think they were in control. The hunt had just begun. The command deck of Vorak Thul buzzed with frantic activity. Tactical officers shouted over one another, struggling to interpret the incoming reports. The warlord stood rigid at the center of the chaos, his mandibles clenched tight. Every moment that passed, the situation worsened. The humans had not just resisted, they had counterattacked. Korvek approached, his tone strained. "Warlord, we've lost contact with the entire 7th Legion. 2,000 soldiers stationed in the ruins of New York. Gone. No distress signals, no escape pods launched. Just silence." The warlord's claws tapped against the console. "What about the orbital surveillance? Show me the last transmissions before they disappeared." A technician pulled up the data. The main screen flickered to life, showing the streets of New York as seen through the visors of Zyrak's soldiers. The footage was dark, grainy. Interference had corrupted parts of it, but enough remained to piece together the final moments of the 7th Legion. The soldiers had moved in squads, their thermal scanners sweeping the ruins. Heat signatures flickered and vanished before they could lock onto them. The footage showed nothing but shadows stretching across the broken buildings. Then the whispers began, soft at first, like wind against metal. Then movement. Blurry figures shifted in the periphery of the screen. The soldiers turned, weapons raised, but nothing was there. A shadow darted between buildings. A soldier cursed and fired. The plasma shot illuminating the darkness for a brief second before vanishing into the void. His breathing quickened. Then, the first scream. The warlord's gaze narrowed. The camera feed jerked wildly as the soldier turned. A Zyrak trooper was gone. Only his weapon remained on the ground, still warm from his grip. Another scream, followed by gunfire. The feed cut out. The technician swallowed. That was the last transmission before we lost them. Korvek exhaled sharply. "Warlord, this is not conventional warfare. We must regroup." The warlord ignored him. He turned to the communication officer. "Activate the emergency distress beacons. I want every surviving unit to fall back to the nearest stronghold." The officer's claws trembled. "Warlord, we have already sent the recall order." The warlord's gaze darkened. "And?" The officer's voice dropped to a whisper. "No one has responded." For the first time in his long and violent career, the warlord felt something foreign settle in his chest. A feeling he refused to acknowledge as fear. He turned back to the screen. "Deploy Terra-class war drones. If the enemy refuses to show itself, we will burn everything down until there is nowhere left to hide." Korvek hesitated. "Warlord, if we do that, we risk eliminating any potential prisoners." The warlord cut him off. "We are past the point of taking prisoners. Do it." The Terra-class drones deployed within minutes, descending from the fleet in massive numbers. Each drone was a mechanical predator, equipped with thermal sensors, auto-targeting weaponry, and ground-penetrating scanners. They swept through the ruins of occupied cities, hunting for anything that moved. For a moment, the command deck was silent. All eyes locked onto the screens as the drones transmitted live footage. Buildings stood in eerie stillness, their skeletal remains untouched by time. The only sound was the distant hum of machinery. Then the first anomaly. One of the drones locked onto a heat signature, a figure moving through the ruins. It was fast, too fast. The drone adjusted its trajectory, weapon systems engaging. The figure stopped. For a moment it stood perfectly still. Then it turned its head and looked directly into the drone's camera. The command deck fell into an unnatural stillness. The figure was human, or at least it looked human, but its eyes were something else. They burned with an unnatural intensity, a cold, unblinking stare that sent a primal shiver through even the most hardened warriors on the bridge. The warlord leaned forward. Zoom in. The screen adjusted, bringing the figure into sharp focus. Its skin was pale, unnaturally smooth, its face devoid of expression. It did not react to the drone's presence. It simply stood there, watching. Then it smiled. A flicker of static disrupted the feed. The next instant, the drone's self-destruct sequence activated. The screen flashed white. The drone was gone. The officer's voice cracked. "We just lost Drone 117. The entire unit, it just shut down." Krorvek took a step back. How? The fail-safe should have prevented. Another alert blared. More drones went offline. Then more. One by one, their signals vanished, their feeds cut to static. Then a transmission came through. Not from the drones, from Earth. It was an open-channel broadcast. Every screen on the command deck flickered, and a voice, a human voice, filled the room. It was calm, steady. "You shouldn't have come here." The warlord's mandibles tensed. "Trace the signal. Now." The technicians worked frantically, but the voice continued, unfazed. "You thought we were weak. You thought we were unprepared, but you never asked the most important question." The warlord's claws dug into the console. "What question?" Silence. Then the voice whispered, "What if we knew you were coming?" A chill spread through the command deck. The warlord's grip tightened. "Enough of this! Find the source!" An explosion rocked the fleet. The ship trembled as alarms blared. The main screen switched to the external cameras. The warlord froze. The Zyrak fleet, his fleet, was under attack. But not from space, not from human ships. The ground itself had turned against them. From the ruins of Earth's cities, energy pulses erupted into the sky, targeting Zyrak warships with pinpoint accuracy. Massive structures hidden beneath the ruins had risen, revealing powerful planetary defenses. This wasn't resistance. This was a trap. The realization hit like a physical blow. The humans had known. They had let the Zyrak land. They had allowed the invasion to happen. And now, they were closing the jaws of their planetary fortress. Another explosion rocked the fleet. Battleships detonated mid-air, targeted by unseen forces. The warlord turned to Krorvek, his voice sharp. "Full retreat, now!" Krorvek didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the screen. The warlord followed his gaze and felt his chest tighten. The voice had returned, but now it wasn't just one voice. It was thousands, whispering, laughing, speaking in 100 different languages, in perfect unison. "Welcome to Earth." The screen shattered into static, and outside, in the darkness of space, the slaughter had begun. The Vorak Thul trembled as another explosion ripped through the fleet. The warlord gripped the edge of the command console, his mandibles clenched in frustration. He had underestimated this world. His arrogance had blinded him, and now his forces were dying in numbers he had never thought possible. This was no longer a campaign of conquest, it was a slaughter, and he was losing. Krorvek stood at his side, his voice barely steady. "Warlord, the Akarven, the Kraxis, and the Zurkhan have been destroyed. 5 more battleships are crippled, and we are losing smaller vessels by the second. The orbital defense network is active across the entire planet. We must withdraw." The warlord's claws dug into the console. He did not retreat. He had never needed to. But the tactical display told a different story, one he could no longer ignore. Human defenses were not just counterattacking. They were dismantling his fleet, ship by ship. A desperate transmission crackled through the bridge speakers. "This is the Varkhan. We are..." The voice cut off in a burst of static as the icon representing the battleship winked out from the holographic map. Another loss. A pulse of fury surged through his veins, but he forced himself to think clearly. If he allowed his emotions to control him now, he would die here along with the rest of his fleet. He turned sharply toward Korvac. "Initiate emergency retreat protocols. All surviving ships are to break formation and withdraw to deep space." Korvac hesitated. "Warlord, if we abandon the ground forces, they will be dead." The warlord cut him off. "They are already dead. If we stay any longer, we will join them." Korvac's mandibles twitched in protest, but he obeyed. He turned to the communications officer. "Broadcast emergency retreat orders. All remaining vessels are to disengage and jump to hyperspace at the first opportunity." The command deck erupted into frenzied activity. The warlord watched as ships desperately maneuvered to escape the storm of human retaliation, but something was wrong. A new alert flashed across the console. The warlord's eyes narrowed. "Report," the officer's voice wavered. "Warlord, we are trapped." A silence fell over the bridge. The warlord's claws tightened. "Elaborate." The officer swallowed hard. "The humans. They have deployed a gravity well generator. It is disrupting our ability to enter hyperspace. We cannot leave." The warlord's breath came slow and measured. He should have expected this. The humans had outmaneuvered him at every step. Now they were ensuring he had no escape. A transmission request flickered onto the main display. The source was Earth, the same signal from before. The whispering voice had returned. "You thought you could leave?" The warlord's claws flexed. "Locate the source." The technicians frantically worked, but the whispering voice continued, filling the command deck like a specter that refused to be silenced. "You started this war, but you will not decide how it ends." Korvac's breath came unsteady. "Warlord, if the gravity well remains active, we will be annihilated before we can even attempt an escape." The warlord's mind worked furiously. He had one option left, a desperate, unthinkable option. "Prepare a precision strike on the gravity well generator." His voice was ice. "If we cannot leave, we will burn a hole through their defenses." Korvac's eyes widened. "But warlord, we don't know its exact location." "Then we find it." The fleet shifted. Every surviving warship diverted power to its weapon systems. The warlord had no intention of winning anymore. His only goal was to survive. Another transmission flickered in. A human face appeared on the screen, the first he had seen since the invasion began. A man, his expression unreadable. The man studied him for a long moment. Then he spoke. "You are afraid." The warlord felt a slow, creeping rage curl inside his chest. He had never felt fear in his lifetime, never. And yet, this human, this fragile, insignificant creature, spoke to him as if he were nothing more than prey. The man leaned forward slightly. "You thought you understood us. You thought this would be easy. But you never asked yourself the only question that mattered. The warlord already knew what was coming. What if we knew you were coming?" Another explosion rocked the ship. The warlord did not flinch. He turned to Korvac. "Fire everything we have." The fleet opened fire. Every remaining warship unleashed its arsenal. Orbital strikes rained down across the planet's surface, aimed at anything that could be housing the gravity well generator. The warlord would turn Earth into ash, if that's what it took to break free. For several agonizing moments, nothing happened. Then a rupture in the energy field, a sliver of open space, a way out. The warlord didn't hesitate. "All ships, execute hyperspace jump, now." Engines roared to life. Ships surged forward, racing for the breach before it closed. One by one, vessels vanished into the void, escaping the nightmare below. The warlord remained at his post, his claws gripping the console as the countdown for Vorak Thul's jump initiated. He watched as smaller ships, damaged, desperate, failed to reach the breach in time. Explosions lit up the darkness. His fleet was reduced to a fraction of its original size. Then the final command screen flickered to life. Jump sequence initiated. The ship lurched forward. The gravity of Earth began to slip away. The warlord exhaled slowly as the swirling tunnel of hyperspace consumed them. He had escaped, but he had not won. Korvik stood in silence beside him. Neither spoke. The battle was over. But the war? The war had just begun. The warlord turned away from the viewport, his expression unreadable. Set course for Dominion space. When we return, I will speak before the council. Korvik hesitated. What will you tell them? The warlord's mandibles clicked softly. The truth! The bridge fell into silence. The shattered remnants of the once mighty invasion fleet drifted through the void, wounded, humiliated, and far behind them, the blue planet remained, untouched, unbroken, and waiting. The warlord stood motionless in the center of the Dominion's High Council chamber, his battle-worn armor still marked with scorch patterns from the failed invasion. The vast hall, carved from obsidian stone, loomed around him, its towering pillars etched with the names of 1,000 conquests. The air was thick with silence, the weight of the warlord's failure suffocating. He had returned with less than 100 ships, a shadow of the force he had once commanded. He had left for Earth with an armada, 10,000 warships strong. Now, the Dominion's military elite sat in judgment, their golden eyes reflecting cold fury. Supreme General Zortal, the oldest and most revered of the council, studied him with quiet contempt. His voice was steady, but beneath it lay the simmering rage of a leader who had never known defeat. You stand before us a broken commander, you who were sent to conquer, you who promised us victory. His mandibles twitched. Explain yourself. The warlord raised his head. His voice did not waver. We were deceived. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Deceived? The Dominion did not suffer deception. The Dominion deceived others. Zortal's expression did not change. Elaborate. The warlord exhaled slowly. The humans, they were never prey. We assumed their silence was weakness. It was not. It was a trap. Laughter erupted from the assembled generals. One of them, a younger commander named Kalvex, sneered. You tell us you were outwitted by primitives? You expect us to believe that a race of scattered warmbloods shattered your fleet? The warlord met his gaze without flinching. Believe what you wish. It changes nothing. Kalevic's mandibles clicked in amusement, but Zortal raised a hand for silence. If they were so prepared, why did they allow you to escape? The warlord's claws curled at his sides. Because they wanted me to. A heavy stillness filled the chamber. Zortal's eyes narrowed. Elaborate. The warlord took a step forward, his voice lowering. The humans knew we were coming. They allowed us to land, to spread across their cities, to feel in control. They did not resist in the way we expected. They did not engage in direct battle. Instead, they waited. They studied us. And when they struck, they did so with precision, with tactics we have never seen before. He exhaled. They did not simply fight us. They hunted us. The murmurs returned, this time laced with unease. The warlord's next words silenced them. Earth is no ordinary world. It is a fortress, a prison with invisible walls, a death world. Zortal leaned forward slightly. And yet you returned. That means they failed to destroy you. The warlord's mandibles twitched. No, it means they chose not to. The council stiffened at his words. No species in the Dominion's history had ever allowed a defeated enemy to retreat. War was total. War was annihilation. Zorbal studied him for a long moment. And why would they allow you to return? The warlord's claws flexed. To deliver a message. Silence. Then, the chamber lights flickered. A transmission interrupted the council's secure network, overriding all channels. The warlord froze. He recognized the voice instantly. The human. The same voice that had whispered through his fleet. The same voice that had haunted the last moments of his campaign. It echoed through the chamber with calm certainty. This is your only warning. Gasps rippled through the generals. Some turned to the technicians, demanding to know how the message had breached their encryption. The warlord already knew the answer. The humans were already inside the Dominion's networks. The voice continued, "Do not return." Zortal's mandibles tightened. "Enough of this. Trace the signal, shut it down." The technicians scrambled, but the voice spoke again, unhurried. "You think yourselves the masters of war, but you have never fought an enemy like us. You have never faced a species that adapts, that evolves, that becomes the very thing it needs to be to survive." A pause. Then, the final words. "If you come again, you will not leave. There will be no mercy, only extinction." The transmission cut out. The chamber fell into stunned silence. The warlord closed his eyes briefly. He had seen enough of human strategy to know that this was not a bluff. Zortal's expression was unreadable. "You truly believe they would destroy us?" The warlord met his gaze. "Yes," Kalavek scoffed. "Let them try. We will return in greater numbers, with greater firepower. This time, we will glass the planet from orbit before setting foot on its surface." The warlord turned to him sharply. "You assume you can." Kelvek's mandibles flared. "What does that mean?" The warlord exhaled slowly. "The humans disabled our fleet. They infiltrated our systems, and they let us escape." He let the words settle before continuing. "We do not know the full extent of their technology. We do not know what else they have been hiding." He turned to face the council as a whole. "But I do know this. They are watching us now, listening, and if we return, they will be ready." Zortal studied him for a long, tense moment. Then he slowly sat back in his chair. "What do you propose?" The warlord's voice was steady. "We leave Earth alone." The chamber erupted into furious protests. The Dominion had never backed down from a war, never left a world unconquered. But Zortal remained silent, his golden eyes fixed on the warlord. After several moments, he raised a hand. The shouting ceased. Zortal's voice was low, "And if others do not heed your warning, if others seek to take Earth for themselves," the warlord's mandibles clenched, "then we let them." Zortal's eyes narrowed. "You would allow outsiders to claim the world that defied us?" The warlord's gaze was cold. "No. I would allow them to die." Silence. Then, Exortal did something no one expected. He laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound, filled not with amusement but with understanding. "You are right," he said finally. "Let others test the strength of this death world. Let fools throw themselves into the abyss. Let them learn what you have learned." His mandibles twitched in something almost like satisfaction. "We will watch from afar, and when the galaxy understands what you now know, we will decide if Earth is worth the cost." The warlord did not argue. He simply inclined his head. Zortal rose from his seat. "Let it be known, the Dominion will never return to Earth." Caleb's expression darkened, but he said nothing. The warlord turned without another word and strode from the chamber. As he stepped into the darkness of the corridor, he allowed himself a single thought. The humans had won. Not just the battle, not just the war. They had changed the course of the Dominion itself. And the warlord, for the first time in his long life, was glad. Because now he understood. Some worlds are not meant to be conquered. Some worlds are meant to be feared.